The case of Anna Walsh, a horrific event in the basement of a family home. For more than a year now, an inquiry has been underway into the puzzling disappearance of a young woman and mother of 3 children, Anna Walsh. In January of last year, the matter was reclassified as a violent crime, even though the body of the missing 39-year-old American woman of Serbian origin has still not been discovered. Her husband, Brian Walsh, who had earlier faced legal trouble involving fraud, was taken into custody on charges connected to her disappearance. Nobody could have envisioned that this man might be responsible for taking the life of the mother of his sons. It is worth noting that the Walsh family seemed outwardly to be quite wealthy, accomplished, and content. In addition, the couple lacked nothing, residing in an opulent home and being able to afford whatever they wished. Yet very few people knew what was taking place behind the closed doors of this spacious and attractive house. Even the individual closest to Anna, her mother, was unaware of the mortal danger her daughter faced. Remarkably, years earlier Brian succeeded in drawing Anna away from her former husband in a highly unusual way. So unusual that Anna and her first spouse even requested police protection because of harassment and threats. Still, she ultimately left with Walsh, to whom she remained married for more than 7 years. But what occurred that caused the head of the family to decide to eliminate his wife? And what did he do with her? Who exactly was Anna Walsh? Anna Lebisic, who later became known as Anna O'Neill after her first marriage, was born on April 18, 1983, in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. There she spent her early years growing up alongside her younger sister within a cultured family environment. Her educational path took her to the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, where she distinguished herself as one of the school's top students. Continuing her studies, Anna enrolled at the renowned University of Belgrade, the oldest and largest university in Serbia. Her studies focused on foreign languages, eventually resulting in a master's degree in French language and literature. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. At the age of 22, diploma in hand, Anna looked toward wider opportunities and career advancement in the United States, a decision fully encouraged by her family. In 2005, she set out to pursue her American dream. After settling in the United States, Anna sought to expand her education in the field of hospitality management. She assumed administrative positions at prestigious hotels, including the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia, part of the exclusive Relais and Chateau Hotel Group. Anna's warmth, openness, and strong sense of responsibility enabled her to rise quickly through the professional ranks, earning admiration from colleagues and supervisors alike. Fluent in multiple languages and skilled at conflict resolution, her natural charm and charisma made it easy for her to build relationships. Loved by co-workers and surrounded by a growing circle of friends, Anna embraced every opportunity to excel. She became a U.S. citizen while retaining her Serbian nationality, earned a high income, and invested in her own home and vehicle. Her travels further expanded her perspective, and her career continued to thrive, culminating in a promotion to senior manager. Anna's intelligence, beauty, slim figure, and bright smile attracted numerous admirers. While working at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she fell in love with Marcus O'Neill, the hotel's head chef. Their relationship led to marriage in 2009, and Anna took her husband's surname. Who was Brian Walsh? Brian Paul Walsh was born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a prominent, wealthy, and respected family. His father, Thomas Walsh, was a renowned neurologist who worked at one of the state's top hospitals, where he led a department and also taught at an esteemed medical university. From an early age, Brian was the classic spoiled child, surrounded by luxury and never hearing the word no. He attended one of the finest private schools, wore costly designer clothes, and lived a comfortable, carefree life. Despite his parents' attempts to give him the best possible education after completing school, he failed to remain enrolled in any of the 3 elite colleges his father had secured for him. Still, Brian was anything but unintelligent. Those who knew him recalled him as sly, calculating, and rather aggressive. He invariably discovered a way to obtain whatever he desired by one means or another. Brian was infamous for his exceptional, almost obsessive craving for money and an extravagant lifestyle, and he was extremely unwilling to part with his cash. In his younger years, he frequently borrowed money from friends and never paid it back. While attending college, he would take friends to the most upscale restaurants and then, through various tricks and manipulations, make sure others covered his portion of the bill. For many years, Brian was estranged from his father, until the elder Walsh's death in 2018. Their relationship deteriorated after the ungrateful son fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from Dr. Thomas Walsh's personal account and vanished with the funds. The father chose not to report his son to the authorities and even attempted to convince him to return the money willingly. When Brian refused, Thomas cut off all contact with him. By the time this outrageous theft occurred, Brian's parents had long been divorced, his father had started a new family, and he decided to permanently remove his eldest son from his life and his will. However, following Thomas's death, Brian immediately resurfaced and even filed a lawsuit, alleging that the will had been forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to deprive him of his rightful inheritance. Naturally, he failed to prove his claims or obtain any share of the estate. Furthermore, people who knew Brian described him as greedy, malicious, and notably cruel, with violent tendencies and an inability to manage his emotions. He achieved his goals through force, and during episodes of anger he became dangerous. According to certain accounts, in the late 2000s Walsh underwent treatment at a psychiatric facility in an effort to control his fits of rage. It was during this time that he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy, a truly unusual love story. The future spouses met in 2014, when Anna was employed as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatley Hotel in Massachusetts. At that time, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who also worked there. Brian was one of the hotel's guests, and he was instantly captivated by the attractive young woman. The fact that Anna was already married did not discourage Walsh in the slightest. He began to give her attention that became increasingly persistent. Used to getting everything he wanted from a young age and unwilling to accept rejection, he started to pursue Anna relentlessly. He managed to obtain her phone number and even her home address, where she lived with her husband, turning their lives into a complete nightmare. In 2015, the O'Neills were forced to seek police protection from Brian's nonstop harassment, which continued day and night. He constantly searched for Anna, called her at work, sent messages to her personal phone, and demanded that she divorce her husband to be with him. The situation worsened when Walsh threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she did not leave with him. What followed remains uncertain, including why Anna ultimately changed her decision. However, a year after requesting police protection from Walsh, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Furthermore, just a few months later, Brian became her second legally wedded spouse. The newly married couple settled into a luxurious home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, about 20 miles southeast of Boston, in an affluent and well-maintained neighborhood. During this marriage, they had 3 sons in rapid succession. The boys were born a couple of years apart, and at the time of their mother's disappearance, they were 6, 4, and 2 years old. Anna did not think about taking maternity leave and managed to balance work with motherhood successfully, continuing to advance steadily in her career. She took on the role of regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate firm, where she earned a substantial income and effectively became the main provider for the household. As her position often required travel to Washington, D.C., she also purchased an additional residence there, registered in her own name, where she stayed during business trips. During these periods, she depended on visiting nannies to assist with caring for her children. So what was the head of this large family doing while his wife was both growing their family and building her career? Brian was unemployed. The $1 million he had once taken from his father was gradually running out, and everything his wife acquired was prudently registered in her name. Brian was actively looking for sources of easy money. Before marrying Anna, he had spent time in South Korea, where he became friends with a very wealthy man whose family owned an extensive art collection. After returning to the United States, Walsh maintained this relationship, and his friend unexpectedly asked for his assistance in selling several paintings by the legendary artist Andy Warhol. Brian readily agreed, but chose not merely to sell the artworks for a commission, instead deciding to profit substantially from the deal. He had access to a collection of abstract paintings by the renowned artist, collectively titled Shadows. He evaluated each painting, secured the required paperwork, including certificates of authenticity, and then decided to produce copies of both the images and the accompanying documents. Walsh contacted artists capable of creating exact replicas of the paintings. He persuaded them that the replicas were needed as backups, since each original piece was valued at approximately $250,000. For several years, the con artist successfully duplicated and sold counterfeit paintings as originals to collectors from different countries, until one buyer, an art expert specializing in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and filed a lawsuit against him. The FBI took over the investigation, and in April 2021, the suspect pleaded guilty to selling fake art. He was placed under house arrest after his attorney negotiated an agreement requiring him to reimburse buyers with the proceeds from the sales in order to avoid actual prison time. Brian's movements were heavily restricted, though he was permitted to leave his home. Twice daily, he was allowed to drive his children to and from their schools. In addition, he was allotted 2.5 hours each morning to visit stores, pharmacies, dry cleaners, and a limited number of other locations in his area to purchase necessities. The list of approved places was restricted and outlined in an official document. On December 31, 2022, the Walsh family was preparing to celebrate the new year together at home. Present were only the spouses and their 3 sons. Because of their young ages, the boys went to bed early, leaving Anna and Brian alone at the dinner table. That day, Anna published her final social media post, offering holiday wishes and vaguely mentioning that the year had been difficult, yet she and her husband remained together. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but on January 4th, her employer, Tishman Speyer, reported her missing to the police. She had not appeared at work, missed closing an important deal, and her phone had been unreachable for several days. Separately from Speyer's report, her husband also filed a missing person report, stating that he was concerned because he had been unable to reach her for several days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st. He claimed that she woke him early that morning, explaining there were problems at work and that her boss had asked her to come in sooner than planned. After that, Mr. Walsh believed his wife left for the airport with only a few belongings. However, contradictions in the case soon became apparent. First, Anna had not bought, changed, or booked a flight ticket for January 1st, nor had she canceled her flight scheduled for January 3rd. Second, she did not appear at the airport on either January 1st or January 3rd. Third, how did she leave the house? Her personal car was still in the garage, and she had not called a taxi. Brian suggested she may have hitchhiked, but this explanation sounded far from believable. Brian's words and conduct raised numerous questions. His versions of events were contradictory, and he did not appear especially distressed by what was happening. Despite being unable to reach the mother of his children for more than 3 days, he reported her missing only on the 4th day, and only after her workplace contacted him. From the very beginning of the investigation and the suspect's arrest, Mr. Walsh was viewed as the main suspect, yet authorities did not have enough evidence to detain him or obtain a warrant to search the family residence. They carried out only a superficial inspection with the homeowner's consent, which revealed nothing. Brian stated that during those 3 days he had been living normally, visiting familiar shops and handling household responsibilities. However, checking his claims turned out to be challenging. Each time he left the house, he left his phone behind, which he explained by saying his older children often took it without asking to play games. On January 5th, police issued a public appeal on television, showing Anna's photograph and asking anyone with information about her location or fate to contact law enforcement immediately. Still, no witnesses came forward. The last known calls Anna made were to her mother and sister on December 31st, making her husband the last confirmed person to see her. Footage from neighborhood surveillance cameras offered no clues. Anna did not appear on any cameras on the morning of January 1st, as though she had never left the house. In contrast, her husband was recorded leaving and returning multiple times, though his destinations could not be identified. Walsh's statement about going to a supermarket was proven false. His car was not seen on any recorded route, nor was he captured inside the store. It was not until January 8th that Brian was arrested for giving false statements and brought in for questioning, while his home was finally searched. Investigators learned that on January 1st he had visited a hardware store in another area, one not included on the list of approved locations he was allowed to visit while under house arrest. There, he spent nearly $500 on a large amount of cleaning products, plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop and bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, apparently hoping the purchase would not be noticed. During the search of the family home, at first glance nothing unusual or suspicious appeared. Everything was orderly, with no visible signs of a struggle or bloodstains. However, when officers went down into the basement, all doubt vanished. This was clearly the site of a horrific crime. Blood smears were visible throughout, and among stored items, a bloodstained knife and saw wrapped in towels were concealed. Earlier, Walsh had acknowledged that on January 3rd, he visited his mother's house on the opposite side of town. He said he had violated the terms of his house arrest because his mother required help with household chores due to her declining health. But after the disturbing findings in the basement, police believe that during this trip he may have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body. All trash bins in the area where the couple lived, as well as those along the route to his mother's home, were examined. These efforts produced results, and in one bin a kitchen hatchet with traces of dried blood and several blood-soaked towels, similar to those found in the Walsh basement, were recovered. Forensic testing confirmed that the blood found in the basement, on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to the missing Anna, eliminating any remaining doubt about her death. Examination of search histories revealed disturbing intent. Police seized a laptop belonging to Mr. Walsh, along with a tablet used by the couple's eldest son, from the Walsh home. The search histories on these devices stunned investigators. Weeks before his wife's disappearance, Brian had been actively searching online for information about which states were most advantageous for divorce in terms of property division. He also looked for information about whether he could claim ownership of the second house in Washington, D.C., which belonged to Anna and was registered solely in her name, thus revealing a possible motive for the crime. As for the tablet, the very first search made at around 4 in the morning on January 1st was how long it takes for a body to begin decomposing. This was followed by almost 24 searches about how to dispose of a body, how to clean blood traces, how to dismember a body, whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed, how long DNA traces persist, and whether someone could be charged with a crime if the body was never discovered. All of this information was searched using his young child's tablet, the child of the woman he had ruthlessly dealt with. By January 3rd, Brian was already searching how and when a person can inherit the property of someone who has gone missing. Clearly, he was confident he would avoid punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. On January 18th, Brian was officially charged with the murder of his wife, even though her body or any remains had not been found. Prosecutors believe that on the night of January 1st, Brian intentionally or accidentally caused his wife's death, and then chose to dispose of her body by dismembering it in the basement of their home. He then wrapped the body parts in plastic and, over the following days, threw them away in trash bins across different areas of the city. The area surrounding the Walsh home, as well as locations within a couple of kilometers, was thoroughly searched for evidence. Nearby wastelands, forested areas, and bodies of water were also examined, but these searches produced no results. The defendant pleaded not guilty and refused to reveal what he had done with the body. In addition, it emerged that Anna had been unhappy recently and had even been considering divorcing her husband. She mentioned this several times in phone conversations with her mother and sister. The day before her disappearance, she called her mother and asked her to fly from Serbia for a few days. However, her mother apparently did not take her daughter's words seriously and chose to delay her visit. The trial of Brian Walsh is ongoing. The accused is currently being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility, awaiting his next court appearance. Anna's mother has been following the investigation from her home, as she has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the consulate in New York, which has in turn been communicating with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure that Anna's mother is promptly informed about the investigation and court proceedings. As for the Walsh's 3 sons, they are now in state custody. None of Brian's family members are willing to care for them, citing Anna's mother's advanced age and poor health, and her sister, who currently resides in Canada, also refused to take in her nephews. Only Anna's close friend, Pamela Barden, has expressed a willingness to take the boys, preferring this option rather than having them separated and placed in different foster homes. Moving on to the next case. Banaz Mahmoud. Many years ago, scientists believed that religion would soon vanish and that humanity would live in a benevolent, rational world. Yet religion did not disappear. In fact, the majority of the world's population remains religious to this day. The Kurds are an Indo-European ethnic group, the fourth largest nation in the Middle East and the largest in the region without an independent state. The vast majority of Kurds are Muslims. Religion establishes certain rules of behavior, making them sacred, so people fear breaking them. Today, however, we will examine the story of a family where religious rules were distorted to serve their own immoral beliefs. On January 26, 2006, a young man, Rahmat Soleimani, went to a police station to report his beloved girlfriend, Banaz, missing. He became concerned for her welfare after being unable to contact her for a week. The police initially did not take the report seriously, as he had no family ties to the missing woman, but they were compelled to check the information and visit her residence. When police arrived at Banaz's home, they found nothing to confirm Rahmat's claims of her disappearance. Her parents remained calm, showing no obvious concern, as if their daughter were not truly missing. Moreover, the family claimed Banaz had not been home much lately and insisted she was likely not missing, probably staying at a friend's house. The police accepted this explanation, but Rahmat persisted. He harassed the police with daily visits to the station, forcing them to take search measures, refusing to give up. He desperately searched for his beloved Banaz. Banaz Mahmoud was born on December 16, 1985, in Iraq. She belonged to a traditional Iraqi Kurdish family with strict religious beliefs. They lived in the rural tribal area of Khalediza in Iraqi Kurdistan. Mahmoud Babakir Mahmoud and his wife Baya had a son, Bahman, and 5 daughters, Beza, Behal, Payman, Jaban, and Banaz. It was a typical Iraqi family with rigid views on the role of women. In 1995, when Banaz was 10 years old, her family fled to the UK. The move did not alter the family's beliefs. Remaining deeply religious and traditionally minded, the senior Mahmouds did not intend to change their way of life, even in a liberal European country. They rejected modern notions and lived strictly within their religious community. Following the community's traditions, Banaz was forcibly married at the age of 17 to a man 10 years her senior. He had flown in from Iraq shortly before the wedding, spoke no English, and was barely literate. She had met him only 3 times before the wedding, once on her father's property. A girl with brown eyes, long dark hair, and a gentle smile, she submitted to tradition and moved into the home of a strange, alien, and cruel man. From the very first days Banaz crossed the threshold, her husband set about controlling her. Moral abuse, beatings, and physical violence became a daily reality for the girl. Banaz, who had spent half her life in the UK and witnessed modern lifestyles, refused to endure cruelty and tyranny from her family. She attempted to leave her husband many times, returning to her father's house, but her family forced her back. Divorce was out of the question, considered a disgrace for the entire Mahmoud family. With no support from her relatives, Banaz went to the police twice, but there she was essentially abandoned to her fate, with authorities not even questioning her husband about her injuries. In July 2005, after 2 agonizing years of marriage, Banaz escaped from her tyrannical husband and returned to her parents' home. This was the first link in the chain of events that would lead to Banaz Mahmoud's disappearance. Following her separation, Banaz felt as if she were breathing freely again. She met a man named Rahmat Soleimani. The bright, pretty 19-year-old girl fell in love with him. Rahmat was captivated by Banaz's beauty and modesty. They cared deeply for each other, but had to keep their relationship secret. After exchanging phone numbers, the lovers allowed themselves to communicate only twice a day, early in the morning and late in the evening. Rahmat was unlike any of the men in Banaz's previous circle. Calm, judicious, and polite, Rahmat treated Banaz with great reverence and tenderness, instantly winning her heart. In a short time, the couple was already dreaming of a wedding and a happy family life. They even devised names for their future children. These fantasies filled Banaz with joy and kept her afloat, preventing her from breaking under the weight of hatred and aggression spewed at her by her family, who never accepted her departure from her husband. In early October 2005, while walking down the street, Banaz noticed a car following her and someone tailing her. From their appearance, she realized they were members of the Kurdish diaspora sent by her father. Knowing her family's foundations, the girl became very frightened for her safety. On October 10, 2005, Banaz went to the police again. During a 2-hour interview, she recounted in detail to the detective on duty her life with her husband, the injuries he had inflicted, her family's resentment, and the ongoing surveillance. She informed local police that she had been repeatedly beaten by her tyrant husband and that, during one assault, she nearly lost a tooth for publicly calling him by his first name. She repeatedly emphasized to the police that she seriously feared for her safety and even her life. Unfortunately, Banaz's statement was filed away, and the detectives did not even question her family or husband to verify her claims. Once again, Banaz's report was not properly acted upon. She promised to contact the police again if she felt endangered. For about 2 months, Banaz and Rahmat met secretly without being discovered. But in early December 2005, when they met near a London subway station, they were spotted by members of the clan. Information about this perceived disgrace was immediately relayed to Banaz's father. That same evening, a council of male relatives gathered at the Mahmood family home. During a heated discussion of Banaz's actions, which they deemed inappropriate, her uncle Ari Mahmood declared that, to restore the family's honor, Banaz should be killed. She overheard this conversation. In December 2005, Banaz again went to the police, detailing that she had been under surveillance for months and that the previous day she had learned they intended to take her life. She listed 5 family members who were supposed to carry out the attack, but law enforcement once again dismissed her warnings. Soon it became clear that this was a grave mistake, one that would result in Banaz's disappearance. To learn her fate, detectives would later have to navigate a web of lies, cruelty, and negligence. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father deceived her into visiting a relative's house, claiming they would discuss her divorce. Upon arrival, Mubakir Mahmood made her drink brandy and left her alone in a room with the TV on. As she turned, she saw her father putting on rubber gloves and reaching for a rope. Realizing she was about to be taken from life, Banaz rushed to the front door, which was locked. To escape, she had to break a window, cutting her hands on the shards. The girl managed to reach a nearby cafe, where she fainted. Paramedics transported her to the hospital and alerted the police. Once she regained consciousness, Banaz called Rahmat and asked him to come. After being discharged, she went to live with Rahmat Soleimani. They welcomed the start of 2006 together and were happy. By mid-January, however, the Mahmood family began aggressively urging Banaz to return home to reconcile and discuss her marriage to Rahmat. Banaz trusted her mother and father and agreed to return to her father's house, believing that if her father attacked, her mother would protect her. As a precaution, she again visited the police station, providing a full statement and naming those who might harm her. Though fearful, she returned to her family's home. On January 22, 2006, 3 men attempted to abduct Rahmat in the street, trying to force him into a car. He fought them off and reported the incident to the police. 2 days later, he and Banaz were to appear at the station to testify, but Banaz never arrived. All attempts by Rahmat to contact her failed. After returning to her parents' house, Banaz Mahmood disappeared. Rahmat, who had been in constant contact with her, grew extremely worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. Numerous appeals eventually prompted law enforcement to take action. The case of Banaz Mahmood's disappearance came under the scrutiny of the Homicide and Serious Crime Directorate, and Chief Inspector Caroline Good was appointed to lead the investigation. The initial theory was that Banaz was being held in a house within the diaspora. To locate her, Inspector Good organized an extensive search of properties associated with the Mahmood family. Key suspects, including Banaz's father, uncle, and ex-husband, were summoned for questioning. Police also sought 3 other men named by Banaz in her December 2005 statement: Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Hama, her cousins. However, when officers attempted to search the forested areas and question her family, doors were slammed in their faces, and the family offered no cooperation. At the family home, police found no photographs of Banaz, and according to Caroline Good, officers were shocked by the family's complete indifference. 30 individuals eventually drew the attention of investigators. All were arrested and interrogated, during which more than 20 vehicles and 300 cell phones were seized. Those questioned repeatedly attempted to obstruct the investigation, providing contradictory testimony about Banaz's whereabouts. Some lied about seeing her after her disappearance. Others, including Banaz's mother, refused to speak to the police, and a few claimed she had fled. Realizing voluntary cooperation was impossible, Caroline Good obtained authorization to install listening devices in the cells of those arrested. At that time, Banaz's father, uncle, and Muhammad Hama remained in custody, while the other 2 men on her list managed to flee to Iraq. The first results from the wiretaps horrified detectives. Not only did the 3 arrested men show no remorse, they openly delighted in recounting Banaz's death. From their recorded conversations, it became clear that in the early hours of January 23rd, the Mahmoud family had deliberately left their home, allowing Ali, Hussein, and Hama inside. There, they beat and tortured Banaz for 2 hours. At the conclusion of the abuse, Hama placed a cord around her neck and strangled her. While recounting the final moments of Banaz's life, Hama laughed, recounting her terror and suffering. The confession of her cousin Muhammad Hama, admitting he had been present when Rahmath was threatened, proved to be the turning point. While awaiting trial, Hama's phone calls were secretly recorded. Caroline Good listened in, increasingly horrified, as Hama proudly detailed the torture of Banaz. He described how she vomited and struggled silently, how he wrapped the rope around her neck 3 times so tightly it cut into her skin, and how he pressed down with his feet while pulling on the cord. Banaz clung to life until her last breath, and it took the perpetrators more than 30 minutes to kill her. Detectives, including Caroline Good, were moved to tears by the cruelty Banaz endured. During the abuse, her 30-year-old cousin Dana Amen assisted the perpetrators in pushing Banaz's body into a suitcase. Ari Mahmoud then dragged the suitcase outside to a waiting vehicle. Hama noted in his conversations that a passing police car did not stop, despite hair and an elbow protruding from the luggage. Those who were supposed to protect her orchestrated her murder, strangled her with a shoelace, and stuffed her body into a suitcase, which they then transported out of London, with discussions mentioning a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good cross-referenced the information from the wiretaps with the movement data from the suspects' phones to narrow down the search area. Given the vastness of the terrain, the task could have taken weeks, but the criminal's own careless boasting helped the investigation. During one conversation, a suspect casually asked whether the freezer had been returned to its place. That single remark gave Good a critical clue. A police helicopter was dispatched to survey the area, and while repeatedly circling, it spotted a backyard littered with trash, where among black garbage bags a white oblong object, likely a freezer, stood out. A closer ground inspection confirmed the hunch. Police began digging in shifts, but when the hole reached shoulder depth, many were ready to give up, everyone except Caroline Good. She recalled Muhammad Hama's words boasting that he had buried Banaz so deep that she could only be found with an informer. Persuading the team to continue, she oversaw the search until late on April 28, 2006, when the suitcase was finally recovered. Banaz's remains were in a severely decomposed state, so identification relied solely on dental records and DNA. Her body, folded in a fetal position and hidden in a suitcase, had been buried under a freezer in the garden of a Birmingham house. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were formally charged. All displayed complete confidence in the righteousness of their actions and showed no remorse. Muhammad Hama even smugly declared that the case would never reach trial, claiming he had acted in retaliation. Following the discovery of Banaz's remains, Caroline Good faced intense pressure from the Kurdish diaspora, as numerous people attempted to provide the perpetrators with alibis, asserting that they had been in public on the day of the murder. In total, 50 people were implicated in Banaz's death, each in some manner involved. Reflecting later, Caroline Good recalled her contempt for these men, noting that 50 men had collectively executed a single woman and were proud of their actions. In early March 2007, London's Central Criminal Court began hearings against Boubacar Mahmoud, Ari Mahmoud, and Muhammad Hama. Prosecutor Victor Temple described the crime as a cold-blooded execution, ordered by Banaz's father and uncle. In June 2007, the jury unanimously found all 3 guilty and denied them leniency. Boubacar Mahmoud, the father, received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. Ari Mahmoud, the uncle, received life with a minimum of 23 years, and Muhammad Hama was sentenced to life with a minimum of 17 years. Judge Brian Barker, delivering the verdict, stated, "To restore your so-called family honor, you decided she must die and her memory erased. This is a barbaric and heartless crime. What honor exists in a father placing social status above the life of his own flesh and blood?" Yet such words meant little to the perpetrators, who had long planned to eliminate what they perceived as a disgrace. 4 months after the convictions, the London police were informed that Muhammad Ali had been arrested in Iraq for a crime against a boy. Ali had taken the boy's life, and securing his extradition required significant effort, as Iraq typically resisted such measures. In June 2009, British authorities successfully extradited Ali to the United Kingdom. Omar Hussein, the last of the 5 principal perpetrators, remained in hiding in the Iraqi countryside, evading public attention. In December 2009, during an altercation with one of his brothers, Omar Hussein was shot in the leg and required medical treatment. While at the hospital, the police, who had been alerted, arrested him, and following his discharge, preparations for his extradition to the UK began. Initially, Hussein claimed he had not been in London in 2005 and therefore could not have been involved in Banaz Mahmoud's murder. This claim was contradicted by UK Social Security records, which showed he had been receiving refugee benefits at the time without interruption. In March 2010, Hussein was extradited to the United Kingdom, where he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Dana Amin, who had been present in the house during Banaz's murder, received an 8-year prison sentence for assisting in disposing of her body and obstructing justice. Banaz's recorded interview at a police station from one of her residences proved crucial in establishing her family's culpability. She had handed over a letter to South London police naming the men she feared would kill her and her boyfriend, Rahmat Soleimani, with whom she had been seen together. The individuals she named were members of her family and the broader Iraqi Kurdish community, outraged by her decision to divorce a husband who had treated her cruelly. Despite repeated attempts to leave him, her family's insistence forced her return. The police's prior indifference to her repeated warnings ultimately cost Banaz her life and led to significant changes in how honor-based crimes are handled in the UK. Following Banaz's murder, an inquiry into police misconduct was launched. An independent commission prosecuted 9 officers for their inadequate response to her allegations. 7 received reprimands and 2 were dismissed. Particularly notable was the determination of Chief Inspector Caroline Good, whose efforts not only located Banaz's body, but also secured the convictions of her father and uncle and facilitated the extradition of the remaining perpetrators from Iraq. Tragically, however, these outcomes could not restore Banaz's life or undo the betrayal by those who should have protected her, her own relatives. Banaz was interred at the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service was held on June 26, 2007, at the Morden Auditorium, followed by the placement of a granite headstone at her grave. Her family did not attend either ceremony. Only a few individuals, including Rahmat Soleimani, Caroline Good, and Banaz's 2 sisters, honored her memory. The memorial was funded by law enforcement officials involved in the case and a women's rights organization. Rahmat Soleimani, who remained in the UK under witness protection, never recovered from Banaz's death, writing her a letter declaring that she had been the love of his life and, indeed, his entire world. Tragically, in May 2016, 10 years after the crime, he took his own life, marking his 3rd suicide attempt. The case also highlights the systemic difficulties in tracking honor-based violence. Police are not required to maintain records of such crimes. In 2010, the Association for the Protection of Women's Rights in Iran and Kurdistan reported over 2,800 documented cases of honor-related violence. However, an organization supporting victims of honor crimes and forced marriages revealed that more than half of the 600 monthly calls they received went unanswered due to insufficient evidence. The United Nations estimated that in 2000, around 5,000 honor killings occurred globally, representing the most extreme punishment for women perceived to have dishonored their family or community. Although the majority of such cases occur in South Asia or the Middle East and within predominantly Muslim communities, cases like that of 19-year-old Banaz Mahmoud have exposed tensions within immigrant communities attempting to adapt to changing ways of life. Some groups argue that thousands of honor crimes remain unnoticed within minority communities in Britain. Hundreds more women are taken overseas, where they are forced into marriage or seriously harmed when their changed views on life place them in conflict with traditional male-dominated communities. Banaz Mahmoud Bakabir Aga, a young woman of Kurdish origin, died on January 23, 2006, for the sake of her family's honor. Her older sister, Bahawel, urged other women in similar circumstances to hers and her sisters not to be afraid to seek help before it was too late. Even today, she continues to fear for her life, lives at a secret address, and never goes outside without a long black veil covering her entire body and face except for her eyes. After all, even fleeing or living a hidden life means existing in constant fear of being discovered. And from Banaz's story, it is clear that there could never have been a happy ending. Eastern women likely absorb submission and dependence on men from early childhood, repeatedly accepting their authority, whatever form it takes. The Metropolitan Police team responsible for the investigation, the recovery of Banaz's body, and the prosecution of those involved in her murder received an award for their investigative work. Chief Inspector Carolyn Good was honored with the Royal Police Medal for leading the investigation. The videotape, which had remained largely unnoticed by the public for 7 years, later became crucial evidence for investigators after warnings about the dangers facing the young woman were largely ignored. A camera positioned in the corner of a police interview room captured the young woman's nervousness as she brushed her hair away from her face and began to recount her grim story. Banaz Mahmood quietly and in detail described the violence and oppression she suffered at the hands of her abusive husband. She spoke of intimidation by men on the street whom she recognized. Finally, she warned of her impending death because of the dishonor she was believed to have brought upon her family. "Until now, they follow me," Miss Mahmood says in broken English with a strong Iraqi accent, as she had lived in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. "This is the main reason I came to the police station. In the future, at any time, if something happens to me, it will be them." Then the camera switches off, the lights go out, and complete darkness follows. Moving on to the next case. Donna and Samuel Eckerd. The end of June 2010 was extremely difficult for the family of Donna and Samuel Eckerd. Their 19-year-old son, Sean, had gone missing. The evening before, Sean had an argument with his older brother, Stanley, and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Sean had never before allowed himself to be away from home for extended periods without his phone or without notifying his mother. Late that night, the entire family became alarmed by the young man's disappearance. However, officially, the search for the boy began only 24 hours later. Missing person posters with photographs of smiling, blonde-haired Sean were placed at all stations, in supermarkets, and along the streets. Yet even after 2 days of searching, there were no results. The police were at a loss as they continued their efforts. For more than 2 days, Sean Paul Eckerd was officially listed as missing. Relatives, acquaintances, and a small number of friends assembled a group of volunteers who day and night combed local venues, questioned random passersby, and minute by minute reconstructed the young man's route that night. The police, without halting the search, began to examine more closely the habits and daily rhythm of the Eckerd family in order to recreate the sequence of events that preceded Sean's disappearance. Donna and Samuel Eckerd were married and had a complex family history. They had 6 adult children from earlier marriages. After enduring hardships and disappointments in their previous unions, they found their refuge in each other's companionship and settled in San Diego, California. They rented a large, comfortable family home and attended the local church every weekend without exception. The family was deeply religious and lived a quiet, unsociable life. A few years after moving there, they had a son, Stanley, and 2 years later, a second son, Sean. Donna devoted herself entirely to the household and to raising her sons. As a result, the brothers grew up surrounded by love and care. Both attended a good local school, and on weekends, without fail, the whole family took part in church activities. The older children, having reached adulthood, left their parents' home and spread across the country to start families of their own. Despite this, the Eckerd family remained close. They stayed in contact, spoke regularly, and spent all family holidays together. Sean was a simple, cheerful boy. He had a striking appearance, charisma, and perceptiveness that drew people to him like a magnet. He knew how to listen and show empathy, which allowed him to make friends very easily. Stanley, by contrast, had a more restrained personality and was cautious about everything unfamiliar. He was shy, which made socializing far more difficult for him than for his brother. Despite the age difference, they shared one group of friends and classmates. Together, the brothers were inseparable, supporting one another and always watching out for each other. The boys were well-mannered and performed very well in school. They always maintained a trusting and friendly relationship with one another. Light teasing between them was taken with humor by their parents. Respect was considered the highest value in the family. Donna and Samuel raised their children from an early age in faith in God and according to God's laws. Life in the Eckerd household flowed steadily in its own way. As the brothers grew older, their interests quietly became completely opposite. The younger Sean played in a music band, while the older Stanley became interested in martial arts. Each young man's life was filled with vivid impressions and emotions, which they shared with the family in the evenings. Sean was always the first to speak. His stories about music, friends, and future plans occupied most of the evening time. When the family gathered before dinner and shared the emotions of the day, everyone listened to Sean. There was little time left for Stanley, nor did it seem to him that he had much to share. There were no grand plans for the future, no thrilling stories, not even tales of friends that might draw attention. So Stanley quietly listened to his brother's stories. On one such evening, Sean told his family that he had met a neighboring girl named Mary Jane. A delicate young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair completely dazzled Sean. Through the open window of the house where the girl lived, he heard enchanting piano music, as if spellbound. Drawn by the captivating sounds, he walked toward the music and entered the house without knocking. Confidence in his own charm allowed Sean to handle such an amusing situation with dignity and cleverly get acquainted with the girl he liked. She was a few years older than Sean, but this did not prevent them from maintaining a friendly relationship. As the life of the party, Sean often organized picnics to which Mary Jane was invited. They spent a lot of time walking, visiting parks and observation decks. The emerging teenage romance was interrupted by the harsh reality of the adult world. The Eckerd family received troubling news about the illness of Donna's elderly mother, the grandmother of Sean and Stanley. Seeking well-being, the parents tried to consider the interests of every family member, but the decision they made fundamentally changed the life of the entire family. Sean did not want to leave his homeland, his friends, and his Mary Jane, but the parents' decision had already been made. The Eckards left the city where their children were born and raised and moved to another state. Thus, in 2005, as fate would have it, the Eckerd family settled in Donna's mother's house in the small town of Spring Hill, Florida, where they began a new life. The move felt like a breath of fresh air for the whole family, because the decision turned out to be the right one. Sean and Stanley's grandmother began to recover. Sean's heart was broken. He missed the band he played in, his walks with Mary Jane, and spending time in his favorite city. But it was impossible for life-loving Sean to remain sad for long. After some time, the new life became just as full as the one he missed. Donna and Samuel successfully found jobs at the Presbyterian Church, where they spent almost all of their time. Donna took care of children in the nursery, and Samuel helped at the chapel. Over time, the brothers grew close again and once more made new friends together at school. The old life seemed to be reborn in a new place. Sean played in the school band again. Stanley attended a martial arts school located just a couple of blocks from their new home. Despite this busy new life, Sean could not stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every evening after classes, he locked himself in his room, and they talked on the phone for hours. Their goodbyes always ended the same way, with Sean saying he dreamed of meeting again. Each time, he promised that after getting his parents' permission, he would definitely come to see her. While the younger brother grew up carrying his first love in his heart, the older Stanley tried to establish himself within the family in his own way. Quiet and reserved Stanley, due to his rigidity and modesty, seemed to be deprived of parental warmth and attention. In search of self-expression, he made a series of poor decisions that would have grave consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, he informed his parents that he planned to drop out of school and devote his life to studying martial arts and creating a martial arts club. However, youthful maximalism led the young man into bad company, where he began engaging in petty fraud and experimenting with illegal drugs. In 2007, these unhealthy associations eventually led Stanley to arrest. He was caught stealing and charged with felony fraud-related offenses. News of the older son's misconduct delivered the first serious blow to Donna. She was hospitalized with a heart attack, but the situation was quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer hired by Donna's sister. He skillfully defended Stanley, proving the absence of direct evidence, which allowed the young man to be released quickly, receiving only a suspended sentence. This incident deeply frightened Stanley. He felt guilty and withdrew into himself, hoping to be understood and accepted by his family. After surviving the frightening events that happened to Stanley, Sean did not tell his parents anything about his own decisions. During his summer vacation, he took a job as a waiter. After saving some money, he left only a note for his mother and went to California to marry Jane. The long 2-day bus journey to his beloved felt endless. The scenery outside the window kept changing, day turned into night, and Sean imagined how at the final stop he would see her, his Mary Jane. The driver announced the last stop, and the bus came to a halt. Sean was ready to rush to her, because through the window he had already spotted her joyful face and her long hair, which she was brushing back behind her ears with her fingers. They spent some of the happiest days of their lives together. They had picnics just like during his best high school years. Sean confessed his love to Mary for the first time, and his feelings were returned. After another walk, the young people sat down on a bench. Sean suddenly felt dizzy. His vision darkened. He lost consciousness. Sean was taken to the hospital. The young man was fading like a match within just a few days. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister. Jennifer urgently flew to California. Doctors determined the cause of such a rapid decline in a strong and healthy young man. Tick-borne encephalitis develops suddenly and very quickly, leads to complications of various kinds, including inflammation of the brain. A difficult battle for Sean's life and health began. Doctors fought for the boy's life for a long time. More than a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation helped him return from the brink. Sean endured a very long and difficult recovery. An ordinary tick bite during a summer walk turned into a serious trauma for him. Jennifer brought her brother back to Florida, where he faced therapy and a long rehabilitation. Mary Jane was left waiting. Once again, the only means of communication for the lovers was the telephone. A chain of troubles and unexpected illnesses united the Eckerd family. Donna did everything possible to completely rid her beloved son Sean of the consequences of the serious illness. She carefully monitored his nutrition and physical activity. Such devoted care led to Sean's full recovery and to Stanley's inner resentment and jealousy, which he nurtured little by little. After some time, Sean regained his strength and returned to studying music. In 2009, he completed his studies and dreamed of going to marry Jane, returning together and introducing her to his parents as his beloved. But Sean's plans were not meant to come true. Stanley introduced his brother to his dream girl, Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly found common ground with both brothers. Stanley was in love and deeply attracted to her, but the girl was impressed by the cheerful and sociable Sean. For some time, Stanley actively courted Samantha, and she accepted his attention. Several romantic meetings ended with a passionate kiss. Stanley was extremely happy, but Samantha, who had said yes to the older brother, was still thinking about the younger one. Samantha decided to write a message to Sean in which she confessed her feelings for him and invited him for a walk around the city. The young man agreed, and they spent the evening walking along the waterfront and talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean did not try to win the girl, because his heart had long belonged to another. A rejected Samantha wrote a message to Stanley and told him that Sean had been seeing her, confessing that she liked him very much. Stanley was enraged. That same evening, he went to his brother's room, where they talked. At first, the brothers spoke calmly, then their words turned into shouting, and then there was complete silence. The parents were at home, but the brothers sometimes argued loudly, so they did not consider anything unusual had happened. Their mother was the first to realize that Sean was missing. He did not answer her calls. Remembering the previous evening, she received an explanation from Stanley that Sean had left the house after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received a terrifying phone call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who answered heard only a woman screaming into the receiver. A piercing male groan could be heard in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally managed to register the call for help. Jennifer continued screaming. She begged for help and said, "Oh my God, my brother Stanley killed Sean. He is in the house talking to his mother. His father is freaking lying over his dead son, who has been buried in the ground since early Saturday morning. Damn it, I'm begging for help." Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy encountered a horrifying sight in the backyard of the house. Samuel was kneeling, his hands coated with soil, as he pulled his son's body from the damp earth, screaming and trying to brush the dirt off Sean. In an instant, the quiet neighborhood, with its manicured lawns where the two brothers often waved to neighbors, had become the scene of a violent tragedy. The Eckerd family, who had once raised 2 sons, were now left with the traumatic memory of digging into the ground only to uncover one son's body while watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckert was arrested on suspicion of premeditated murder. At his first interrogation, Stanley claimed that he had no intention of killing his brother. In a moment of anger, he struck Sean on the head. The resulting injury caused Sean to fall. Stanley checked for a pulse, and upon realizing his younger brother was dead, he tied up the body and carried it out the window to bury it in the backyard. At the inquest, Stanley said, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." These words sounded like the cold-blooded calculation of a killer rather than the explanation of a loving brother. In his defense, Stanley stated that he acted for his mother, attempting to protect her from the shock of discovering Sean's death. Afterward, Stanley planned to move his brother's body and rebury it once his parents were gone. His behavior during the interrogation varied. He cried, confessed what he had done, and appeared remorseful, sometimes presenting it as an accident, other times blaming Sean with visible hatred. Stanley spoke harshly and unpleasantly about his younger brother, calling him responsible for all his troubles and admitting that he had won the rivalry for their mother's and Samantha's affection. On that same day, Stanley was formally charged with second-degree murder and taken into custody without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean's body. She presented the results to the court, noting that the victim's neck showed bruising beneath the skin and rope marks, indicating compression of the neck that made breathing difficult. The examination concluded that Sean's death resulted from an inflicted head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magrino scrutinized the case thoroughly. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing commenced, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. In the second row, Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckert, wept as they watched their eldest son escorted into the courtroom. On April 9, 2013, the trial began in Hernando Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Toddy. The defense was led by attorney Alan Hunter, while Pete Magrino represented the prosecution. The prosecution's main goal was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime. Defense attorney Hunter argued that a spontaneous fight led to the tragic outcome. In closing, he asked the jury to consider Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime with what he claimed were good intentions. Stanley Eckert was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and faced a mandatory life sentence if convicted. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13. Stanley's fate rested in the hands of District Judge Anthony Toddy, who presided over the 5-day trial. Second-degree murder carried a potential life sentence. Stanley Elias Eckert consistently maintained that he had never intended to kill his brother 3 years earlier, before burying him in the front yard. Prior to the trial, Eckert had rejected a plea deal that would have allowed him to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 20-year sentence. Eckert remained impassive as the clerk read the verdict. Samuel and Donna Eckert wept quietly. As the jury exited, Samuel's sobs turned into screams, and numerous relatives gathered around the parents. The jury concluded that Eckert had not planned to kill 19-year-old Sean, though they did not fully absolve him of guilt. After roughly 2.5 hours of deliberation, 9 women and 3 men found Eckert guilty of second-degree murder. Throughout the trial, the Eckerts expressed that they believed Stanley's account of the events in the early hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for filing the charges. Later, Samuel Eckert praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for his excellent work. The family questioned the appropriateness of the sentence. They filed an appeal to challenge the verdict, but it was denied. "I really can't understand how the jury reached a second-degree murder verdict in about 2 hours," Samuel Eckert said. Despite this, he insisted that their faith remained unshaken. One fact was undisputed during the trial. After his brother's death, Stanley had removed Sean's body from the bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. Samuel Eckert discovered Sean's body 2 days later. During closing arguments, Assistant State's Attorney Pete Magrino showed the jurors photos of Sean's dirt-covered body lying in a fetal position in the grave. "This is not a detective novel case," Magrino told the court. He noted that Stanley, when questioned by detectives on the day his brother's body was discovered, changed his account as many as 6 times, initially claiming he knew nothing about Sean's death. For 2 days after his brother's funeral, according to Magrino, Stanley sent messages from Sean's cell phone to family members, stating that Sean had supposedly gone to California to stay with his girlfriend, Mary Jane. He also used Sean's phone to correspond with Samantha, claiming Sean did not want to communicate and that she should direct her attention to Stanley. After hours of questioning, Stanley finally admitted that Sean had died during a struggle in the bedroom that morning. He claimed he heard a snap in his brother's neck as they fell to the floor. He then hid Sean's body to protect his mother, Donna, who had a weak heart. Stanley stated he planned to inform his father after his mother left on a trip. Those injuries inflicted by the defendant's hands constitute murder, Magrino asserted, also drawing attention to Stanley's statements to detectives and testimony regarding rising tensions over Samantha Rowe. Magrino highlighted testimony about a conversation Stanley had with his brother and a friend in the weeks before Sean's death. During that conversation, the friend testified that Stanley said if he were to kill someone, he would strike the person in the back of the head and bury the body in the yard. That evidence was tenuous at best and cannot dispel reasonable doubt, Alan Lanter told the jury. A crime involves an act with an intended result, Lanter continued. Yes, he was involved in his brother's death, but he did not kill him. Lanter cited testimony from a forensic pathologist who stated that the blow to Sean's head, combined with other factors, his high blood alcohol content and possible lingering brain swelling from encephalitis, likely contributed to his death. The pathologist also testified that hitting his head on the bedroom nightstand during the fall could have been sufficient to cause death. Lanter reminded the jury of Donna Eckerd's testimony, in which she stated that Sean suffered from severe mood swings after his bout with encephalitis. At one point, she described her son's death as an accident. The jury could have considered Stanley guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter. Calling the case a pardonable homicide, Lanter urged jurors not to be swayed by the gruesome photographs of Sean's body or Stanley's poor decision to bury him in the yard, but to focus on the factors that led to his death. Stanley Eckerd did something horrible after Sean died, Lanter said, but he is not a murderer. During the final sentencing, the Eckerd parents were gripped by shock. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The parents were devastated. One terrible day had taken both their sons at once. The cold-blooded killing of an innocent man, and even a brother, lies far beyond the bounds of any adequate human response. In the biblical story, Cain, the brother killer, was banished from paradise as punishment. Stanley, however, solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. Moving on to the next case. The case of Jeffrey Hazelwood. Natalie Henderson, Carter Davis, and Jeffrey Hazelwood were three residents of Roswell. Natalie and Carter were sociable, intelligent, and hopeful individuals. Natalie was highly involved in school activities, frequently representing her school at social events, while Carter managed both his academic responsibilities and athletic commitments. Jeffrey, by contrast, struggled academically, with his grades and overall school performance far below those of his peers. As a teenager, Jeffrey was sent to a military-style school, and after graduating, he remained unemployed for several years. He later obtained a government job, which enabled him to support himself. Jeffrey experienced a difficult childhood. He was born on July 10, 1996, under challenging circumstances. His mother, Sherry, was only 19 years old at the time of his birth, and her partner left her before Jeffrey was born. During her pregnancy, Sherry struggled with drug use. Those around her recognized that she was unable to care for a child. Consequently, when Jeffrey was 6 months old, he went to live with his grandparents. Although his grandparents loved him, his troubled relationship with his mother led to him being labeled a problematic child. Throughout his teenage years, numerous incidents were reported within Jeffrey's family. He often engaged in risky and dangerous behavior. On one occasion, he wrote a note stating that he was going to spend several days in the wilderness to test his survival skills. In another alarming incident, he took his grandfather's gun, causing neighbors to contact the police. His behavior increasingly alarmed his grandparents, who tried to hide the weapons. Despite their attempts, Jeffrey, who was intelligent and persistent, managed to break into a safe and take the knives and swords he was fascinated with. By 2013, when Jeffrey was 16 years old, his grandmother felt compelled to report his concerning behavior to the police, likely out of fear for her own safety and that of others. Just weeks earlier, he had warned her that his patience would eventually run out and that he might hurt someone, though he did not specify who or when. As a result, Jeffrey was sent to a military school. After returning, he entered into a relationship that meant a great deal to him. His social media accounts were filled with declarations of love for his girlfriend, combined with images of wolves, dark quotations, and posts about anger and death. No one seemed to notice or intervene to help Jeffrey. Eventually, the city of Roswell faced a serious tragedy. On August 1st, 2016, a Monday morning, a driver was making a delivery to the local grocery store. At 6 a.m., as he approached the store, his quiet morning suddenly became a nightmare. When he turned the corner toward the delivery area, he was horrified to see two bodies lying next to each other in the parking lot, both deceased and covered in blood. Terrified, he immediately called the police to report what he had discovered. Officers quickly arrived at the scene and found the bodies of two young individuals, a man and a woman, both dead. Police noticed two vehicles parked nearby, and when they ran the license plates, they learned that the cars belonged to Carter Davis and Natalie Henderson. The young couple came from middle-class families, and neither had a criminal record or any prior violations. The investigation began with a search of the vehicles and a review of surveillance footage from the grocery store. The video showed Carter and Natalie driving through the parking lot at around 3 a.m. before disappearing behind the building. In addition, just minutes before their arrival, a silver Honda had parked in front of the store. After Carter and Natalie passed the Honda, a tall man with long, unkempt hair exited the vehicle and followed them on foot, but then disappeared from the camera's view. His facial features were unclear, and the footage did not capture the license plate number. All police could determine was that the vehicle was silver, likely a 1990 or 1998 model, and had mismatched wheels. Police contacted the Bureau of Investigation for assistance in identifying a suspect. The task proved difficult because investigators needed to compile a list of all Honda owners in the city. After carefully reviewing the data, they reduced the list to approximately 650 vehicles and their owners. This elimination process was lengthy and demanding, requiring considerable patience and effort from law enforcement. However, their determination eventually paid off. On August 3, 2016, just 2 days after the discovery of Carter and Natalie's bodies, police identified a driver's license belonging to a Honda owner. This individual, Jeffrey Hazelwood, age 20, lived in Roswell and was already known to police due to his long black hair. His grandparents were stunned when several police officers arrived and knocked on their front door. Their shock quickly shifted to worry when the officers asked about their grandson, Jeffrey. They told the police that they did not know where he was. Jeffrey's grandparents explained that they had forced him to leave the house 2 days earlier. The police then continued their investigation and discovered that Jeffrey was staying at his girlfriend's residence. They were aware of the address and established a perimeter around the home. After spotting Jeffrey's car parked in the driveway, officers waited nearby, calmly anticipating his appearance. Several hours later, Jeffrey eventually came out of the house, entered his car, and drove away. Plainclothes officers followed Jeffrey as he stopped at a gas station, walked around, and changed his clothes. At that moment, officers surrounded him and arrested him on suspicion of murdering Natalie Henderson and Carter Davis before he had time to react. At first, Jeffrey denied killing anyone, but after being detained for several days, he was interviewed by Officer Jennifer Bennett, who had been assigned to his case. During this interrogation, several unsettling details emerged. When he was arrested, Jeffrey maintained that he was an innocent bystander and insisted that he had not killed anyone. However, during questioning, he claimed that another man had pressured him into committing the crime. As the interrogation went on, he stopped mentioning this alleged accomplice. Jeffrey also claimed that a voice in his head had instructed him to kill Natalie and Carter. Despite Jeffrey's many lies and contradictory statements, Officer Bennett was able to reconstruct what happened on the night of August 1st. Jeffrey said his troubles began when his grandparents forced him out of their home. In an attempt to clear his mind, he went to a local Waffle House, but because he had nowhere to stay that night, he decided to park at the local grocery store. He arrived around 3 a.m. and remained sitting in his car. While he was there, 2 cars entered the parking lot, drove past him, and circled the building. Feeling lonely and bored, Jeffrey decided to follow them on foot. After the 2 vehicles parked next to each other, Carter Davis exited his car and climbed into the back seat of Natalie's car. Natalie then joined him in the back seat, explaining that they wanted some private time together. Unknown to them, Jeffrey was hiding behind a nearby electrical panel, watching their interaction. He then climbed a nearby service ladder to gain a better view from the roof of the car. Jeffrey later stated that he did not watch for long. Tragically, Jeffrey had obtained his grandfather's gun after breaking into a safe shortly before being forced out of his home. What followed was horrific. He climbed down from the roof, walked toward Natalie's car, and demanded that Carter get out of the vehicle. He struck Carter with the gun. In that moment of panic, Jeffrey realized that Carter was taller and stronger than him, placing him at a disadvantage in a physical confrontation. In a horrifying act, he lifted the gun and shot Carter in the head at close range, then commanded Natalie to get out of the car. Without explaining what he did to her in detail, Jeffrey later shot Natalie in the back of the head after she turned away. After both victims were dead, he searched Natalie's car, took her wallet, and drove off. However, Jeffrey's criminal behavior did not end there. That same night, he was seen at a gas station using Natalie's credit card to fill his car with fuel. Surveillance cameras even captured Jeffrey wearing a mask to conceal his identity. During questioning, he claimed that even though he had the mask and the gun, he did not commit any additional acts. Jeffrey stated that he needed the mask to hide his identity from the individual who had ordered him to kill Natalie and Carter. After leaving the gas station, he returned to the bodies. He positioned the bodies on the asphalt in the same way they were discovered the following morning. He then contacted his girlfriend and asked if he could stay with her while he sorted out issues with his family. She had no knowledge that he had just killed 2 people and allowed him to stay at her home. Eventually, police located him and took him into custody. During the trial, his behavior was extremely erratic. He spoke to himself, claimed to hear voices, and even adopted a British accent. At one point, he sat trembling, made sudden head movements, and continued talking to himself. He was also observed interacting with an imaginary dog and pretending to strike it on the head. At a later hearing, Officer Bennett presented Jeffrey's confession, revealing the disturbing details he described about that night. He stated that he pulled Natalie out of the car, forced her onto the hood, and then shot her in the head. The defense argued that Jeffrey showed signs of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, Asperger's syndrome, and dissociative identity disorder. While each of these conditions can be managed on its own, the combination of all 4 would make him an extremely unstable individual. However, none of these conditions had been officially diagnosed. As a result, he was found competent to stand trial and, with proper treatment, capable of becoming stable enough to understand the legal process. Given the overwhelming amount of evidence, including forensic material from surveillance footage and items seized by police, the case against him was strong. The prosecution quickly assembled a compelling case against Jeffrey. The original trial was scheduled for September 9, 2016, but it was delayed multiple times because he required treatment. He was transferred to a secure psychiatric facility to continue receiving care until a new trial date could be set. A hearing was held to assess Jeffrey's competency, particularly his ability to comprehend the legal proceedings. While he occasionally rocked back and forth in his chair, psychologists were unable to determine his exact mental disorders. However, they diagnosed him with psychosis, a condition that causes a break from reality rather than being a mental illness itself. Finally, on May 17, 2017, Jeffrey appeared in court as he was nearing recovery. He was not permitted to speak while undergoing treatment, so his attorney spoke on his behalf. The judge offered him a plea agreement regarding the murders of Carter and Natalie, which Jeffrey accepted. He was then sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his life either in prison or in a mental health facility. Moving on to the next case. The case of Kaylin Gillis. Kaylin Gillis, born on February 23, 2003, in Schuylerville, New York, was a young woman filled with promise and excitement. With exceptional academic accomplishments, she hoped to enroll at a university in Florida to pursue a career as either a marine biologist or a veterinarian. She was not only smart and diligent, but she also drew people in with her gentle nature and radiant spirit, serving as an inspiration to those around her. However, a devastating tragedy took place on the night of April 15, 2023, brutally ending Kaylin's life. On that tragic evening, she and her friends were searching for the residence of an acquaintance in Washington County, a peaceful region north of New York near the Vermont border. The group, with Kaylin's boyfriend behind the wheel, mistakenly drove into a private driveway belonging to Kevin D. Monahan, who lived on an isolated property in Hebron on Patterson Hill Road. As soon as they realized they had gone the wrong way, Kalen's group promptly turned around to leave. However, a horrifying event followed. Kevin, the homeowner, suddenly emerged from the porch, armed, and fired at their group twice. Tragically, a bullet struck Kalen in the neck while she was seated in the front passenger seat. In fear and without cell service, they had no choice but to drive another 5 miles to Salem to contact 911. Although emergency responders arrived quickly and made every effort, Kalen did not survive. After the incident, police were sent to Kevin's home to carry out an investigation. However, he was initially uncooperative, refusing to come outside and declining to answer questions for several hours. It required an hour of tense negotiation before Kevin agreed to speak with an officer. In his initial statement, Kevin claimed he had been in bed since 8:30 p.m. and blamed the shooting on a hunter. Kevin D. Monahan, born on October 28, 1957, in Salem, New York, was charged with murder. Neighbors described him as often hostile, short-tempered, and at times aggressive. Although he had no previous convictions in New York, Kevin had been arrested and charged in Vermont in 2001 for aggravated assault with a weapon. However, that charge was later dismissed. After his arrest, Kevin was initially detained at the Washington County Correctional Facility in Fort Edward. Notably, this was where Kalen's father, Andrew Gillis, worked as a correctional officer. To prevent any possible sensitive situations, Kevin was later transferred to the Warren County Jail in Lake George. At his first court appearance on April 16, 2023, Kevin's defense attorney argued that his client was not a flight risk. He stated that Kevin had lived in the community for more than 30 years and owned a local business, showing his strong ties to the area. However, these arguments failed to convince the court. Kevin was ordered to be held without bail. At the same time, Kevin pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder, maintaining his innocence regarding the serious charges. 1 month later, in May 2023, a new indictment was issued, adding additional charges against Kevin. Along with the second-degree murder charge, he was also charged with reckless endangerment and tampering with evidence. These added allegations further increased the seriousness of the case. The court continued to refuse Kevin's request for bail, showing a firm resolve to make sure that he would not escape justice. After multiple postponements caused by different legal issues, the case was officially scheduled for trial on January 8, 2024. This trial was expected to reveal the complete truth surrounding Kalen's death and deliver a just verdict for her. Before the final sentence was handed down to Kevin, Kalen's father, Andrew Gillis, was unable to restrain his anger and grief. His daughter was killed merely because of a misunderstanding, an event he considered completely unreasonable and unacceptable. In his deepest sorrow, he prayed that Kevin would receive a severe punishment and spend the remainder of his life in prison to ensure he could not harm anyone else. With each passing day, Kalen's family endures the devastating reality that the girl they loved is no longer alive. They will never again witness her radiant smile or hear her cheerful laughter, a loss that can never be replaced. During the trial, Kevin testified in an attempt to justify his actions on the day of the tragic event. He claimed that, at that time, both he and his wife felt seriously threatened and that he acted only with the intention of protecting his wife. Kevin stated that they had been awakened by 3 vehicles traveling down the driveway, 2 SUVs, and a motorcycle. In a state of panic, he told his wife to hide in the closet to avoid danger. He then reloaded the firearm and went outside, but his explanation failed to convince the jury. On March 1, 2024, after an intense and prolonged trial, the jury found Kevin D. Monahan guilty of second-degree murder for the senseless killing of Kalen. Following the conviction for second-degree murder, the court sentenced Kevin to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For Kalen's family, the verdict marked a step forward in obtaining justice for her tragic death. They understand that their loss cannot be undone, but they believe Kevin must be held responsible for his actions. They do not want him to remain a danger to the community for the rest of his life. On March 14, 2024, Kevin was transferred to the Elmira Correctional Facility, one of the largest prisons in New York. He was later moved to Wendy Correctional Facility, where he is currently incarcerated. Kevin explained the reasons behind his actions, but the legal ruling ultimately depended on the seriousness of the crime he committed. The sentencing of Kevin D. Monahan brings a measure of justice to the tragic death of Kalen Gillis, but it does nothing to lessen the profound pain her family continues to feel. They have lost a daughter, a friend, and an inspiration. This loss will forever follow them like a wound that never heals. Kaylin's potential, her hopes for a promising future, and her unfinished ambitions were suddenly and painfully taken away. She was a gifted young woman, always willing to learn and contribute, someone who could have made positive changes and helped advance society. However, her life was unjustly taken, leaving behind deep regret and sorrow for everyone. The death of Kaylin Gillis has drawn attention not only in northern New York, but also across the nation. This incident occurred just days after another event in which Ralph Yarl, a 16-year-old boy from Kansas City, was seriously injured by a gunshot. Ralph, a black teenager, was shot by Andrew Lester, an 84-year-old white man, when he mistakenly rang Andrew's doorbell while searching for his younger brother. Andrew was initially released, but was later charged with 2 offenses. On April 17th, he was charged with first-degree assault, a charge that carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Andrew was also charged with using a weapon to commit a crime and could face up to 15 years in prison if found guilty. These 2 incidents, occurring close together in time, have sparked public outrage and fueled widespread discussions about gun violence, racism, and the deadly consequences that can occur when someone is mistaken. Moving on to the next case. The case of Molly Tibbetts. Molly Tibbetts was a lively young woman born in San Francisco on May 8, 1998, to Rob and Laura Tibbetts. She had 2 brothers, Jake and Scott. Molly was lucky to be raised by caring parents and began to perform well in school soon after starting 2nd grade. Life brought Molly an unforeseen difficulty. Everything was going well for her and her parents until they chose to divorce. In 2007, Molly relocated to Brooklyn, Iowa, with her mother and brother. Brooklyn was her mother's hometown, and Molly was now able to experience her teenage years in this peaceful town. The move was challenging for Scott, Jake, and Molly, but their supportive parents offered the help they needed. Their father, Rob, continued to maintain a strong relationship with his children. Even though he could not always be present, he was committed to doing everything possible to support them. Brooklyn is a small town with a population of just 1,400. Life there is quiet, a sharp contrast to the busy pace of San Francisco. Molly and her 2 brothers adjusted very well to their new surroundings. Molly planned to continue her education at Brooklyn College. She was a friendly person who easily made many friends. Molly was intelligent, energetic, optimistic, and cheerful. In 2015, Molly met a senior named Dalton Jack at her school in Brooklyn, and she immediately felt drawn to him. This meeting happened on a cold October evening while Dalton and his friend were sitting in a pickup truck after playing football. Several younger students approached them, including Molly. Dalton was instantly captivated by her. She made him laugh, and he thought she was beautiful. They exchanged phone numbers and soon started eating lunch together and going to the movies. From that moment on, they fell in love, and Dalton considered her his everything. Molly and Dalton's love for one another grew stronger over time. 2 years later, when Molly moved away from Brooklyn to study psychology at the University of Iowa, she kept her relationship with Dalton. While she was in Iowa, Dalton remained in Brooklyn to follow a career in construction, but this did not change how he felt about her. They were able to see each other almost every weekend, and even on certain weekdays. Her freshman year at the university passed quickly. By the end of May 2018, she returned to Brooklyn for the summer. During her break at home, Molly stayed busy throughout her days. She worked at a local children's day camp at Green Regional Medical Center, and in the evenings, she took part in activities to prepare for her sophomore year. Molly also made time to go jogging nearly every evening. She divided her time between her mother's house and her boyfriend Dalton's house on the western side of Brooklyn. Unlike college students, Dalton did not have a summer break and worked most weekdays. His construction work was sometimes local and other times required travel across the state. On July 18, 2018, Molly went to Dalton's house. Dalton lived there with his brother and their dogs, but both men worked away from home. Dalton was working on a project on Highway 61 near Oak. Molly agreed to look after the dogs and stay at Dalton's house to work and study. It was a very hot day, so Molly stayed inside with the dogs and her laptop, hoping the temperature would cool down. The day felt ordinary. She spent her free time talking with her boyfriend on the phone, searching for something to eat, or chatting on Twitter. As the sun went down, the weather became cooler. This seemed like a good time for Molly to go for a run. At around 7:30 p.m., she left her laptop open, sent Dalton a selfie, changed into her workout clothes, and headed toward the cornfield for her run. However, Molly never came back. She was missing that night. Dalton, who had not heard from her that evening, assumed she was simply busy and had gone to sleep. The next morning, when Molly's messages still went unanswered, he started to feel concerned. He reached out to friends to ask whether they had heard from Molly, but none of them knew where she was. All of her social media accounts were inactive. The situation became more alarming when her boss contacted Dalton to ask why she had not shown up for work. Molly was always punctual and had never missed a workday before, so her absence was unusual. Dalton was deeply worried and questioned what might have happened to her. Her silence caused Dalton, her family, and her friends to feel uneasy. By the end of the day, police and members of the local community were organized to search for Molly. Missing posters were rapidly posted throughout the town and nearby areas. Soon afterward, Molly's father, Rob, flew in from California to take part in the search efforts. By mid-July, Iowa was experiencing intense summer heat, and the surrounding cornfields made visibility challenging. Police announced on television that the search for Molly was still underway. Although there were no new developments, the search continued. Molly, a 20-year-old University of Iowa student, had gone missing the previous Wednesday in Brooklyn. She was last seen by a neighbor jogging with her dogs, wearing shorts, a sports bra, and sneakers. At that time, Molly's location was unknown. The only confirmed sighting occurred when a neighbor saw her running east of town that evening. Police had no additional leads. As the weeks went by, the reward for information about Molly increased dramatically to nearly $400,000. Authorities even created a website to encourage the public to submit any information related to Molly. Police also examined data from Molly's fitness tracker to identify her running route. Despite these efforts, the investigation remained unresolved until mid-August. A woman in northeast Brooklyn was reviewing surveillance footage when she noticed something unusual. Alarmed, she reported what she saw to the police, which led to a critical breakthrough. The footage showed a 1951 Chevrolet with chrome side mirrors and door handles. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the car returned and appeared on surveillance cameras multiple times. Then, at 8:07 p.m., the same Chevrolet was recorded again, this time speeding away. Based on the footage, the car, which was acting erratically at the same time and location where Molly disappeared, drew the attention of law enforcement. Police began searching for the vehicle in the small town and were able to locate it quickly. One day, after reviewing the video of the black Chevrolet, deputy sheriffs spotted the car on the road. Rather than stopping it immediately, a deputy followed the vehicle until the driver pulled over. The deputy approached the driver's window and identified him as John Bath. When questioned about Molly's disappearance, John stated that he knew nothing about her and was not involved. He was allowed to leave, but his freedom did not last long. Just 2 days later, police officers went to John's workplace at a dairy farm and observed that he was now driving a different vehicle that belonged to his girlfriend. At this stage, police began to pay closer attention to John, although they still lacked evidence connecting him to Molly's disappearance. Officers took John to the local police station for additional questioning. Even though he was not obligated to answer their questions, he chose to cooperate. The interrogation lasted for several hours, and eventually, John confessed. However, his real name was Christian Bahena Rivera, and he lived and worked in rural Polk County near Brooklyn. Originally from Mexico, he had entered the United States illegally at the age of 17. Because he was unable to work legally, he was not registered in any official system, including at his job on a farm near Brooklyn. During questioning, police asked Christian if he knew where Molly was, and he admitted that he had seen her on the night she went missing. He explained that he noticed her and decided to approach her. When he ran toward her to start a conversation, Molly did not respond. When he continued, she took out her phone and warned him to leave or she would contact the police. The following day, August 21st, after more than 10 hours of questioning, Christian agreed to guide police to a remote area outside Brooklyn. When officers arrived and exited their vehicle, they discovered Molly's body. She was lying beneath corn stalks, wearing only a sports bra and socks. Christian confessed that when Molly threatened to call the police, he became angry and ended up killing her, later hiding her body in a cornfield. Molly suffered between 7 and 12 stab wounds to her chest, ribs, neck, and skull, which ultimately caused her death. This devastating news left Molly's family, friends, and acquaintances heartbroken. As they learned more about the details of her death, their sorrow turned into anger. On August 22nd, Christian was charged with first-degree murder. Fears that he might escape led to his bail being increased from $1 million to $5 million. As the investigation into Molly's disappearance became a murder case, new developments related to her case continued to emerge both publicly and in the media. The following month, Christian denied any involvement in the case despite having initially confessed to Molly's murder. He later withdrew his confession. Police continued to make notable progress in the investigation. They searched Christian's black Chevrolet and found blood both in the trunk and on the rims. Testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Molly, indicating that she had been inside Christian's trunk that night. A number of bureaucratic delays pushed the court proceedings back. The public trial of Christian was postponed for several months and relocated to another county for safety reasons. In August 2019, Christian's defense team filed a 20-page motion arguing that his confession should be excluded as evidence. They asserted that he was not properly informed of his Miranda rights due to his foreign nationality. This meant that although he admitted to killing Molly, he was not warned that anything he said could be used against him in court. As a result, his confession, they argued, could not be admitted as evidence. In addition, the judge delayed Christian's trial until 2020 to allow additional time to review the case. In 2020, the trial was postponed once again. On May 17, 2021, Christian Bahena Rivera's trial finally began. His defense team argued that police had violated his rights prior to charging him with murder. They claimed that officers used unlawful interrogation tactics to coerce Christian into confessing. When this strategy failed, the defense attempted to place blame on Molly's boyfriend, Dalton, claiming that he had cheated on her 3 years earlier and then killed her. However, Dalton had a strong alibi for the time of Molly's disappearance. Although he had been absent from work for nearly 2 hours, multiple co-workers were able to verify his location during that period, and it was evident that he deeply loved Molly. Christian eventually took the stand, but he altered his story. He claimed that 2 armed men came to his home, forced him to drive them until they found Molly, then killed her and made him drive to a cornfield, threatening his son's life if he disclosed what had happened. Christian's original confession, the surveillance footage, Molly's blood discovered in the trunk of his car, and his own implausible account all clearly pointed to his guilt. On Friday, May 28, Christian Bahena Rivera was convicted of murdering Molly Tibbetts. After only 7 hours of jury deliberation, Christian was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Following the verdict, Christian's girlfriend, who had been raising their son Will, vanished from Brooklyn, leaving his son on the farm without family support. With nowhere else to turn, Will was eventually adopted by Molly's mother, Laura. This adoption enabled Will to continue his education and work toward a more hopeful future. Molly's parents consistently chose compassion over hatred, which helps explain Molly's positive nature. The outpouring of support did not stop there. Hundreds of people gathered at the University of Iowa to honor and celebrate Molly's memory. Moving on to the next case. Samuel Doss, Tulsa, Oklahoma, October 1954. A man had just been discharged from the hospital. He was weak, but finally back home. His wife, smiling and caring as always, prepared a special dinner to celebrate his return. She even baked his favorite dessert, prune cake. That night, while everyone slept, something went horribly wrong. By morning, he was dead. No one could explain how a man recovering from illness could suddenly die, just days after showing improvement. And the woman who had fed him that night? Well, she harbored secrets. Nancy Hazel was born on November 4, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, a small town situated between Anniston and Jacksonville, now considered part of Anniston. She was the eldest of 5 children born to James and Louisa Hazel. However, records from that period indicate that Nancy had been conceived out of wedlock. Census records from 1905 show Louisa living alone with her infant daughter, while James appeared in the household later. Nancy's childhood was marked by a harsh and turbulent home environment. James, a strict and domineering man, kept his children out of school for long stretches to help with chores and work the family farm. In contrast, Louisa was a nurturing and gentle presence, striving to protect her children. Nevertheless, the constant control and mistreatment left deep scars. Nancy never received a formal education and struggled with literacy, finding her only solace in secretly reading her mother's romance magazines. Her favorite section was the Lonely Hearts column, where people placed ads seeking love, a world of possibility she dreamed might one day belong to her. But her father, a religious zealot, considered those publications sinful and forbade them in the house. At the age of 7, Nancy suffered a head injury while traveling with her family to visit relatives in southern Alabama. During a sudden train stop, she was thrown forward and struck her head on a metal bar. The injury caused frequent fainting spells and severe headaches, symptoms that would last for years and later be cited as a reason for her emotional instability. As Nancy entered her teenage years, James' control grew tighter. He forbade her and her sisters from wearing makeup or dressing attractively, believing it would attract unwanted male attention. He also prohibited them from attending dances or social gatherings. Despite this, Nancy became a victim of sexual abuse by men in the area, experiences she kept secret. At 15, Nancy took a job at the Linen Thread Company, a textile factory in nearby Anniston. The job offered her a taste of independence and allowed her to purchase the makeup and romance magazines she still read in secret. It was at the factory that she met 20-year-old Charlie Braggs, who lived with his single mother. After only 4 months of courtship, and with her father's surprising consent, Nancy, barely 16, married Charlie in 1921. Yet her marriage offered no freedom. Charlie insisted that his mother move in with them, and the older woman soon dominated every aspect of Nancy's life. She was not allowed visitors or even a voice in how the household was run. Between 1923 and 1927, Nancy gave birth to 4 daughters. Over time, the marriage deteriorated. Nancy turned to alcohol and tobacco, eventually developing an addiction. Both she and Charlie grew distant. Suspicious of each other's fidelity, Charlie would disappear for days, confirming Nancy's worst fears. Tragedy struck in late 1927. Within a mere 2 weeks, their 2 middle daughters died under mysterious circumstances. Both had seemed healthy when Charlie left for work, only to collapse in convulsions after breakfast and die shortly thereafter. Doctors at the hospital attributed the deaths to food poisoning, but Nancy, who had prepared the meals, offered no explanation. Charlie, shaken, refused to eat anything she cooked from that point on and began fearing for his own safety. Soon after, he moved out with their eldest daughter, Malvina, leaving the newborn Florine in Nancy's care since she still required breastfeeding. After Charlie's mother passed away, Nancy started working at a cotton mill to support Florine. In the summer of 1928, Charlie returned, this time with Malvina and a new partner. By the end of the year, he filed for divorce, which Nancy accepted without objection. She packed her belongings and moved to Cedartown, Georgia, hoping for a fresh start. In her loneliness, Nancy sought comfort in romance novels and Lonely Hearts ads. She began corresponding with men who had placed notices in the magazines and eventually caught the attention of 23-year-old Robert Franklin Harrelson, a mason from Jacksonville. Their exchange of letters and photographs quickly intensified, and in 1929, the two married and moved to Anniston. But in a chilling act of abandonment, Nancy left little Florine behind in the empty house. Neighbors alerted Charlie, who retrieved his daughter and attempted to contact Nancy, but she refused to take the child back. Her new marriage to Robert soon deteriorated. He was an alcoholic and, as Nancy would later discover, had a criminal record for assault. Nevertheless, they remained together in a volatile and unhappy marriage for the next 16 years. In 1943, Nancy's life took another unexpected turn when her now-adult daughter Malvina reached out to her. Separated from her husband and 8 months pregnant, Malvina asked to live with Nancy and Robert. After some hesitation, Nancy agreed. That same year, Malvina gave birth to a son. The delivery was difficult, and she spent weeks recovering under the influence of anesthesia. One day, in a drugged haze, Malvina recalled seeing her mother standing over the crib, driving a hat pin into the baby's skull. She was never certain whether it had really happened or was a nightmare induced by the drugs. Shortly thereafter, the infant died in Nancy's arms. Doctors could not determine a cause, and the death certificate simply listed sudden infant death. Following the mysterious death of Malvina's newborn, suspicions began to grow. Malvina could not shake the image of her mother standing beside the crib with a pin in hand, especially since the infant had died in Nancy's arms. Though she never voiced her fears aloud, the unease lingered. Despite her doubts, Malvina did not leave the house. She had met a soldier nearby and was determined to pursue the relationship, even as tensions with Nancy escalated. Their arguments became frequent, prompting Malvina to spend short periods visiting her father for respite. In 1945, Malvina gave birth again, this time to a son named Robert Lee. Her relationship with Nancy had deteriorated to an unbearable degree. Seeking a permanent escape, Malvina returned to her father's home to ask if she and the baby could move in. During her absence, she left Robert in Nancy's care, trusting, perhaps blindly, that her mother would care for him as she had claimed. On July 7, 1945, Nancy and her grandson were alone in the house. That day, Robert died, reportedly from suffocation, having rolled onto his face in bed with his head trapped under a pillow. The cause of death was ambiguous enough to warrant an autopsy, but the coroner ultimately ruled it accidental asphyxiation of undetermined cause. What no one found suspicious was that just a month later, Nancy collected a $500 life insurance policy she had quietly taken out on the baby, naming herself as the sole beneficiary. That same year, Nancy was still married to her second husband, Frank. But Frank's alcoholism and increasingly violent behavior had become intolerable. Then came September 1945. As the Second World War drew to a close, Frank, a former soldier, celebrated Japan's surrender with excessive drinking. On the night of September 14th, he returned home drunk, violent, and demanding. He forced himself on Nancy, an act that became the final breaking point. After the assault, he asked her to bring him the corn whiskey he had left in the kitchen. Nancy complied, but laced the bottle with rat poison. Frank drank it, writhed in agony for hours, and finally died. Yet again, the cause of death was attributed to alcohol poisoning or natural illness. No one suspected foul play, and Frank was buried with no investigation. Shortly after his death, Nancy collected another $500 life insurance payout and used the money to buy 10 acres of land and build a modest home outside Jacksonville. Now, after 16 years of marriage, Nancy was single once again and ready to find a new partner, or perhaps more accurately, her next victim. In early 1950, Nancy moved to Lexington, North Carolina, where she once again turned to the Lonely Hearts columns in romance magazines. It was through one of these ads that she met Arlie Lanning, a widower who had also been seeking companionship. After exchanging letters for a few months, the two met in person. Just 3 days after their initial meeting, they were married. But Arlie quickly proved to be cut from the same cloth as her previous husbands, unfaithful and addicted to alcohol. Though he had affairs, it was Nancy who would often disappear without explanation for weeks or even months at a time. Outwardly, however, she maintained the image of a devoted and cheerful wife. Neighbors adored her, always smiling, always helpful. When she vanished, Arlie claimed she was merely visiting her daughter. No one realized the relationship was deteriorating behind closed doors. In 1952, Nancy grew weary of Arlie's behavior. She poisoned one of his meals with rat poison, and within hours he was dead. The cause of death was ruled heart failure. He was a heavy drinker, and there had been a recent flu outbreak in the area. These factors, combined with Nancy's public persona as a loving wife, meant no autopsy was performed. The town mourned alongside her, unaware of the truth. But then something unexpected occurred. Just a month later, the house Arlie had owned, in which Nancy still lived, burned to the ground. Only the foundation remained. Curiously, a fire insurance policy in Nancy's name covered the loss. Using the payout, she briefly stayed with her late husband's mother, but that arrangement ended quickly when the elderly woman died in her sleep. Once again, Nancy found herself without a home. She moved on, relocating to her sister Dovey's house. Dovey was bedridden due to illness, and just 2 weeks after Nancy's arrival, she passed away. Given her medical condition, no one questioned the timing of her death. Yet for those who would later examine the pattern, the coincidence was chilling. That same year, Nancy resumed her pursuit of another husband. She joined a dating service called the Diamond Circle Club and soon met Richard L. Morton of Jamestown, North Carolina. They married in 1952 in Kansas. Though Richard did not have a drinking problem like her previous husbands, he had other vices, namely pursuing other women. He frequently traveled into town and stayed away for long periods, presumably to chase other women. Nancy grew increasingly irritated and once again began contemplating lethal measures. But before she could act, another distraction arose. In January 1953, Richard informed her that Nancy's own mother, Louisa, had suffered a hip fracture and recently become widowed. He invited Louisa to live with them. Nancy was furious. Richard had not even warned her about her mother moving in. Still, she accepted the situation outwardly. Louisa arrived abruptly, and within 15 days she was dead. She had complained of sharp stomach pains shortly before passing, a symptom consistent with poisoning. Nancy had used rat poison again, this time to kill her own mother. After Louisa's death, officially recorded as natural causes, Nancy refocused on her husband, Richard. Her resentment toward him had only deepened, fueled by his infidelities and wandering eye. Just 3 months later, on May 19th, Nancy once again resorted to her preferred method of murder. She prepared a thermos of coffee, laced with arsenic, and handed it to Richard. He died in his sleep, never realizing his wife had poisoned him. Later that year, Nancy visited another sister. The visit ended in tragedy. The sister began experiencing unexplained stomach cramps, followed by seizures. She lost consciousness and died shortly afterward. Although the symptoms mirrored poisoning, no one suspected Nancy. As before, she remained above suspicion, free to continue her deadly course. With Richard barely buried, Nancy turned again to the Lonely Hearts columns. Through one ad, she connected with Samuel Doss, a minister from Carroll County, Arkansas, who had tragically lost his wife and children in a tornado. At the time, Samuel was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he worked as a businessman. Sober and deeply religious, he seemed like the ideal candidate, respectable, dependable, and sincere. Their courtship was brief but passionate, and by July 1953, Nancy and Samuel were married in Tulsa. Samuel wasn't violent like her previous husbands, but he had his own flaws. His strict puritanical rules irritated Nancy. He insisted on going to bed at sundown and banned all forms of entertainment. No radio, no television, not even a fan in the Oklahoma heat. Nancy endured his household rules for a time, but soon left him in protest, only to return with a new plan. She added her name to his bank accounts and quietly took out 2 life insurance policies, naming herself as the sole beneficiary. Just 2 months into the marriage, she attempted to poison Samuel by spiking his coffee with rat poison, but she miscalculated the dosage. Samuel became violently ill and began convulsing, ultimately vomiting enough to save his life. Doctors initially believed he had a severe intestinal infection. He was admitted to the hospital in critical condition, with high fever and flu-like symptoms. Nancy stayed by his side every day, returning home only at night. After a month, on October 5, 1954, he was discharged. Nancy appeared overjoyed and suggested they celebrate. Back home, she prepared a hearty meal, far more flavorful than the bland food he had received in the hospital. For dessert, she served prune cake, rich and sweet, but secretly laced with arsenic. Samuel devoured the meal. By morning, he was dead. That same day, while arranging her husband's funeral, Nancy also began filing paperwork to collect on the 2 life insurance policies. Once again, her plan seemed to have succeeded without issue. But this time, Nancy had overlooked a crucial detail. Samuel had been seeing the same physician for years, a man who was also a personal friend. When he learned of Samuel's sudden death just a week after his hospital discharge, alarm bells went off. The doctor contacted an attorney, who persuaded a judge to order an autopsy. Still, the doctor needed Nancy's consent. He told her that discovering the true cause of her husband's death might help prevent similar losses in the future. She agreed. The autopsy revealed high levels of arsenic in Samuel's body, enough to kill 5 men. It was no accident. It was murder. The doctor contacted the Tulsa police, voicing his suspicions. Detectives were dispatched to Nancy's home. When they arrived, they found the 50-year-old woman calm and composed. She smiled warmly, showed no resistance, and politely asked if she could bring along her current issue of Romantic Hearts, lying on her coffee table. At the police station, Nancy did not speak of the death. Instead, she quietly flipped through the magazine, eyeing the Lonely Hearts ads for a new man to write to. Detectives eventually confiscated the magazine and asked her to focus on the interrogation. They questioned her about Samuel's sudden passing. Nancy responded with vague comments, her attention still fixed on the pages before her. Persistence paid off. Eventually, the agent secured not one, but multiple confessions. In custody, Nancy Doss began to talk, and what she revealed shocked even the most seasoned detectives. She calmly confessed to killing her 4 previous husbands, and even one of her mothers-in-law, Arlie Lanning's mother. When asked why, she offered a chillingly simple motive. None of them measured up. They were all drunkards, womanizers, or violent, she said. All she had ever wanted was the perfect husband, a true lifelong romance, like those described in her beloved magazines. She went on to admit murdering her own mother, her sister Dovey, and her grandson Robert. But there, her confession ended. When questioned about the deaths of her other daughter, her second grandson, and additional relatives, Nancy remained silent. She insisted she had never harmed any of her blood relatives, contradicting her earlier statements. Yet investigators were unconvinced. It was far too suspicious that so many people around Nancy had died suddenly and under similar circumstances. Authorities exhumed the bodies of husbands, relatives, and children who had died since 1929. Forensic testing confirmed the presence of arsenic in nearly all of them. Among the confirmed victims were 4 husbands, 2 daughters, 2 sisters, her mother, her mother-in-law, and both grandsons. Investigators also discovered that, just before Samuel Doss's death, Nancy had already begun corresponding with a new man, a highway worker from North Carolina. She had even baked him a cake and mailed it as a gift. Had Samuel's doctor not raised the alarm, that man might have become her next victim. Police believed the cake was intended as a deadly introduction. When detectives asked Nancy what she thought should happen to her for poisoning so many people, she smiled and replied, "Whatever you want to do is perfectly fine with me." During her earliest interviews with the press, Nancy's constant laughter while discussing the murders earned her a disturbing nickname, the Giggling Granny. Though Nancy had confessed to multiple murders, the state of Oklahoma chose to prosecute her only for the killing of Samuel Doss. In her defense, she attributed her actions to a childhood head injury, the result of the train accident when she was 7. She claimed it caused chronic pain and mental instability, but psychiatric evaluations determined she was legally sane. On May 17, 1955, Nancy Doss pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to death. Other states, Alabama, Kansas, and North Carolina, also filed murder charges. However, when Oklahoma handed down the death sentence, those jurisdictions dropped their cases, concluding that a single execution would suffice. Nancy could have become the first woman in Oklahoma history to be executed by electric chair. But after further psychological reviews, the judge declared her mentally unfit for execution, citing concerns about precedent and the ethics of executing a woman with diminished mental capacity. As a result, Nancy was spared the death penalty. She was never charged with any of the additional murders. Sentenced instead to life in prison, she faced her fate with surprising cheerfulness. After arriving at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, she granted interviews and spoke openly about her life behind bars. She claimed she got along well with other inmates, but expressed one complaint. She was only ever assigned to laundry duty. As an excellent cook, she had repeatedly requested kitchen work, but officials, and likely the other inmates, were too afraid she would poison the food. 2 years into her sentence, Nancy expressed regret, not for the lives she had taken, but for not receiving the death penalty. Still, she remained upbeat and even joked about her crimes. Over time, she gave several new confessions, always downplaying financial motives and emphasizing her dream of finding true love. Yet this explanation never accounted for the deaths of her babies, her sisters, and her mother. Why she killed those closest to her, many completely helpless, remains a mystery she took to the grave. On June 2, 1965, Nancy Doss died of leukemia in the prison hospital at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She had served only 10 years. Her remains were buried in McAlester, Oklahoma, a site that, over time, became a local curiosity and a frequent stop for tourists intrigued by the case. Moving on to the next case. The Thomas Randolph case. Known by the nickname Black Widower, Randolph stands at the center of a mysterious and disturbing story in which the deaths of his wives leave many questions unresolved. Was he a victim of harsh fate or a ruthless villain? He drew the attention of the public and law enforcement when 4 of his 6 wives died under suspicious conditions. The story of Randolph's greed, betrayal, and intrigue offers a deep exploration into human psychology and the pursuit of justice, making anyone who hears it shiver. So what is the truth? Let us follow the case together today. One evening in May 2008, Gunshots broke the quiet of Randolph's home in Las Vegas, Nevada. His sixth wife, Sharon Cass, was discovered dead in her bedroom, and Michael Miller, a man believed to be an intruder, was shot and killed by Randolph shortly afterward. However, Randolph's account began to fall apart when police uncovered a series of unusual details. He was the only beneficiary of life insurance policies connected to the deaths of his previous wives. Authorities grew suspicious after learning that each of Randolph's former wives had died under odd and questionable circumstances. Randolph was born in 1955 in Fairfield, Illinois. He came from a caring family, with a father who served in the Air Force and a mother who worked as an accountant. Dreaming of becoming a rock and roll star from a young age, he developed an outgoing and flirtatious personality. His first wife, Catherine Thomas, married Randolph when she was 18 and he was 20. She stated that he was controlling, manipulative, and psychologically abusive. She recalled an incident in which Randolph threw a bowl of oatmeal against the wall because it did not contain sugar. They divorced 8 years later. Randolph married his second wife, Becky Galt, shortly after his divorce from Thomas was finalized. Galt was found dead inside their home 3 years later in Utah. She had been shot in the head with a single bullet, and police found her lying on a waterbed. Galt's death was initially ruled a suicide, and Randolph collected a $500,000 life insurance policy. Jana Allman was his third wife. She genuinely believed he had tried to kill her. Allman described an incident in which Randolph was cleaning a gun and accidentally fired it at her, causing a bullet to tear a hole through their kitchen. Randolph claimed the shooting was an accident. But after that event, Allman felt her life was in danger. She chose to file for divorce. Randolph then married Frances Randolph, who died in April 2004 in the hospital after undergoing heart surgery. Allegedly, Randolph did not allow his daughter to visit Frances while she was hospitalized. The daughter testified that Randolph had her mother cremated within 24 hours of her death. His fifth wife was Leona Stapleton, about whom little is publicly known. During his first trial, family members and friends testified in court that she died of cancer. In 2005, Randolph met Sharon Cass, and they fell in love, prompting him to move from Utah to Vegas. During a cruise, they persuaded the ship's captain to marry them and declare them husband and wife. Despite being married, Randolph reportedly continued to have affairs with other women. She died 2 years later. Each time, Randolph was the sole recipient of large insurance payouts from these deaths. These suspicions slowly developed into substantial evidence during the investigation, making Randolph the primary suspect in a series of brutal crimes. Police began to re-examine Sharon's case. Further investigation showed that Randolph not only received life insurance payments, but also gave inconsistent statements and unlikely details in his explanation of self-defense. Randolph stated that he shot Michael while he and Sharon were under attack. However, his account did not align with the evidence found at the scene. Police discovered no indications of forced entry, and Michael was found dead at the location without signs of a struggle, which contradicted Randolph's claim of self-defense. Investigators drew on Randolph's history of violence in earlier relationships to identify him as the main suspect, leading to his arrest and the filing of murder charges. At his first trial, Randolph was charged with 2 counts of murder for the deaths of Sharon and Michael. It was not until 2017, 9 years after the killings, that the case finally went to trial. The prosecution presented a comprehensive picture of the crime, placing responsibility on Randolph for the murders and asserting that he acted to obtain Sharon's life insurance money. The state also referenced a prior murder case involving Randolph, in which he had been charged with the murder of his second wife in Utah. Randolph was ultimately acquitted after being tried for murder in 1989. In addition, another witness testified to the jury that Randolph had approached him with an offer to pay for Frances's murder before she died during surgery. The informant also stated that Randolph suggested making the death appear to be a burglary. Furthermore, investigators and attorneys from that earlier case testified in the Nevada proceedings concerning Sharon's death. His surviving former wives, Catherine and Gehenna, also testified at his murder trial, describing the strange and violent behavior they had personally witnessed. At the conclusion of the trial, Thomas Randolph was sentenced to death on 2 counts of murder. Randolph's defense immediately argued that he had been unfairly targeted because of his prior arrest in Utah, and that the crime scene had not been properly preserved. After the trial ended, Sharon's daughter, Bayer, cried and embraced her friends when the verdict was announced. For more than 9 years, she had waited for the man who killed her mother to be punished. However, Randolph filed an appeal, contending that prosecutors should not have introduced evidence related to the death of his second wife because he believed it would bias the jury's decision. After the court accepted his appeal, his guilty verdict was overturned in July 2020, when the Supreme Court reversed its ruling, deciding that the Utah murder case and its details should not be allowed as evidence in Sharon's case, as they might not have been directly relevant. As a result, Thomas Randolph was retried. During the 2023 trial, prosecutors used phone records to show Randolph's close relationship with Michael, emphasizing the numerous phone calls exchanged between them. The prosecution argued that Randolph conspired with Michael to kill Sharon in order to collect insurance proceeds exceeding $300,000. The trial also revealed the insurance policies Randolph had taken out on his wife in the 2 years preceding her death. The prosecution highlighted inconsistencies in Randolph's statements to police, pointing the jury to a video of the home. They stressed contradictions in the evidence found at the scene and in the trajectory of the fatal bullets. Deputy District Attorney Christopher Hamner portrayed Randolph as the architect of the crimes, dismissing the notion that Randolph was a victim. Christopher emphasized discrepancies in Randolph's testimony in light of the physical evidence, the insurance policies, and his relationship with Michael. Despite the defense's efforts, the evidence presented at trial appeared to conflict with Randolph's version of events. After a 15-year legal process, a Nevada jury found Thomas Randolph guilty of orchestrating the murder of his sixth wife, Sharon Koss, and of fatally shooting the hired killer, Michael Miller, whom he allegedly enlisted to carry out the crime. The verdict was delivered after 5 hours of deliberation and was marked by intense emotion inside the courtroom. Randolph, 68, who wears headphones because of hearing loss and uses a wheelchair, remained composed as the verdict was announced. Colleen Byer, the daughter of Randolph's sixth wife, Sharon Koss, responded with a combination of shock and relief upon hearing the second guilty verdict. She said, "I'm so relieved. I can't believe it. It's been 15 years, and it's been a horrible nightmare." At his sentencing hearing in April 2024, Randolph was given a sentence of 60 years in prison. However, shortly after the sentencing, he and his defense lawyers filed another appeal seeking to overturn the conviction. The result of that appeal is still pending. Since his conviction, Randolph, also known as the Black Widower, has been incarcerated at the Lovelock Correctional Center, located at 1200 Prison Road in Lovelock, Nevada. The Thomas Randolph case stands as a classic example of a complicated series of events involving multiple suspicious deaths of wives and years of legal battles. It is not only a story of crime and loss, but also a journey defined by suffering and delayed justice. The unresolved deaths have left lasting scars on both the families involved and the wider community. Despite being convicted and receiving a long sentence, Randolph continues to file appeals, preventing the case from being completely closed. What happens next will depend on the outcomes of these appeals, and the pursuit of justice will carry on. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.